Well, Steve, likewise, and of course, it's been 4 days since I was extremely disappointed after that loss to Penn State. So I always look forward. I was telling someone yesterday, I said, I might end up asking Steve more questions than he asks me.
You ask away whenever you want. That's always fine.
Just that goal line failure, and then of course the kind of quote fluke interception in the end zone. I mean, they had their chances, and but they couldn't stop their run. And what can you say?
Yeah.
I hate to see it.
Right. That's what I told everybody. They said, "What's the difference?" Is that got to find 6 yards, 3 in the first half and 3 in the fourth quarter.
That's exactly right.
So, Gerry, the Steelers, now the trade deadline's there, and they acquire Mike Williams from the Jets. And if this were a couple of years ago, I think it'd be like, wow. Yet you feel like at this stage he's just another guy. What did they think he can add to their receiving core?
Well, it's a good point, because I think with the Jets he was just another guy. 11 catches, 12 catches, whatever it was. He just didn't become the receiver they thought he would be. They gave him a 1-year deal for $10 million. My goodness gracious, which is why he was scheduled to visit the Steelers like a day or two later, but when the Jets offered him that, he jumped on it, and I don't blame him. Right. But yeah, he has not shown that he was the receiver that he was with the Chargers, and I don't think he's going to come in here and be any type of savior, but I think he helps their receiving core, because he is a quality receiver, so long as he shows he can be somewhat what he used to be. A 5th-round pick seems like it could be a little high for him, given the way he played with the Jets, and when you see that DeAndre Hopkins went for a 5th-round pick, but nonetheless. I think it was a good pickup for them, and even though the price might be a pinch high, we'll see how he plays out. But at least what I see, Steve, is I see them bringing in, making 2 moves, and they're not standing pat. They didn't sit there and say, "Okay, we're 6-2, we're top the division, we're doing okay." No, they sat there and said, "Look, we're 6-2, we're in this thing. Let's make a couple moves to make sure we remain in this thing."
The schedule's been one thing that that certainly hasn't hurt getting to 6-2. But when you look at the remaining schedule, they've positioned themselves well. But from this point on, what are you seeing schedule-wise that the Steelers will have to fight to get to the finish line?
Well, Steve, you look at their 3-game win streak to start the season. They were against teams who were 16-10. Come on. Right. You look at their current 3-game win streak, it's against teams who were 7-21. Now, to their credit, they at least did what they didn't do last year, and that was beat up on the teams they should have beaten. If you go back to last year, they had that 3-game skid against the bottom feeders of the league. So they've avoided that. But now, here they head to the second half of the season, and 4 of the teams they're going to be facing are 4 of the teams with the best records in the league. The Chiefs at 8-0, the Eagles, the Ravens, and now the Commanders on Sunday. Probably the biggest upstart team in the league. So the schedule gets significantly more difficult. And but they position themselves. Let's say they go 4-5. Let's say they go 4-5 in the last 9 games.
Right.
Okay, that's 10 wins. Now you got your fingers crossed if you're going to get in. If you go 5-4, that's 11 wins. Chances are you're going to get in. I go back, Steve. I looked at this the other day. You have to go back to 2012 to find the last time Mike Tomlin's team finished with a losing record in the final 9 games.
Right.
So since then, they've been, I don't know the exact record, but it's been well above 500, and I think up over 600 in their last 9 games. So historically, the last 9 games have been on their side. The only time they didn't have a winning record since 2012, I think it was 2021, and they were 4-1. Otherwise, they've had a winning record in their last 9 games every year.
So when you look at Russell Wilson, he's now stepped in. Has he done anything just by being a veteran and being Russell Wilson that has allowed Arthur Smith to maybe be a little more creative as to what he does?
Absolutely. That has happened. And we've already seen that in 2 games. They knew they were getting that with Russell Wilson. It's the reason why Stevie's a 9-time Pro Bowler and a Super Bowl winning quarterback. He didn't get that way by accident. And so, yeah, it's not only more creative, it's more confident in what you're able to call and what you want to do. And I don't think it's any accident that the running game has flourished the last 2 weeks now. Look, the running game statistically has been good. But a lot of that, too, was built with Justin Fields gaining 40, 50, 60 yards a game. Well, that's not happening the last 2 games, and it's helped the running game because now you have to be concerned about the passing game down the sideline, which Justin Fields would do, not with the accuracy that this guy has, but the check downs, the passes over the middle, the different options that Russell Wilson can bring you. The pre-snap reads, look, they're not going to do anything that he hasn't seen in 13 years. So being aware of that is going to help the running game. And now, to Najee Harris's credit, Steve, it's the best I've seen him run in 4 years. He runs free, and according to Pat Fryermuth, our old Penn State guy, he runs happy. Pat's a good friend of his, and he says he's having fun out there. And he runs like he's having fun. It's not just the bullish runs where he moves the pile 15 yards. It's the breakaway runs. He has 14, 20-yard runs since last year, since the beginning of last year. Only Derrick Henry in the league has more. So, that's not a part of Najee Harris's game you expect to see, but that's what we're seeing. And he's been very, very good. Props to him. I give him a lot of credit.
Yeah, I do too. There's also something else with Wilson. I think that's an underrated thing, because you and I have been around this a long time. There's some guys that just the way they throw the ball, it's an easier ball to catch.
No question.
And I think that with Fields, where a lot of things to me will be fastballs, Wilson's ball has a little more change of pace to it. Is that fair, Gerry?
It's extremely fair. And Steve, I was just saying this the other day about Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
When I'm watching him. And as I'm watching the game, and I said to my wife, I said, he needs to learn pace on his ball. He's been around long enough.
Yep.
He just throws fastball after fastball.
Yep.
And you can't do that. And not only does Russell Wilson have that kind of touch, but he puts the ball where the guy is usually going to catch it in stride. The throw, the 43-yarder down the sideline the other night, last week, to George Pickens,
yep,
and the 29-yard touchdown to Calvin Austin III couldn't have been more precisely thrown if they had a GPS system attached to them. They led them perfectly on passes where you're running out of room. And to me, those were just illustrations of what Russell Wilson has always done and what he can do for his receivers. And, Steve, you and I have talked about this before.
Yeah.
Great receivers don't make average quarterbacks better, but great quarterbacks make average receivers
Absolutely.
better. And that's what the Steelers, one, we're hoping to see, and two, are seeing with Russell Wilson.
Defensively, we know what T.J. Watt means. There's just no question. I mean, he's a separator from everybody else in the league. What are the dominoes, though, that you're seeing where other guys have the ability to really shine because he's getting so much attention?
Well, with the injuries they have had at outside linebacker, I think getting Alex Highsmith back certainly helps their cause and will certainly help him. And so there's no question when he's in there, you can't pay as much attention to T.J. Watt. And also, they've been without Nick Herbig for the past 3 games, and then they just got Highsmith back. So when both of those guys were missing, now they could really devote a lot of attention to T.J. Watt. And his sack numbers are down, but that doesn't mean he's not disrupting the game, as we've seen with these strip sacks and fumble recoveries and punch-outs that he's had the last couple weeks. And that's how he not only can dominate the game and make it and be a difference maker, but he influences the game so much just by his presence because of the attention they have to pay to him and always want to know where he is. And it's not like he's jumping all over the defense to figure out, okay, where's he lining? Occasionally he does. But for the most part, they know where he is, and they try to avoid him.
Yeah, because that brings me to the rest of it. We all know that since Ryan Shazier got hurt, they've been trying to get that linebacking situation solved with somebody. Do you feel like now they're, at least as a group, they've done a good job of solving it, and what has Patrick Queen meant to helping them solve it?
Well, a big part, because Patrick Queen is the every down linebacker who can be sideline to sideline. And you're seeing the last couple games now that he's comfortable with the defense, the calls, and the guys around him more especially. You're seeing what impact he can have. He covers that field extraordinarily well. And now you throw in a guy like Peyton Wilson, who's a sub 4-5 guy, a 4-4-3 guy who can run like the wind. And now this is a guy who, in second and third down situations, is an asset as well. So now you've put speed in there to go with a thumper like a Landon Roberts. So that linebacker crew across the board is as good as they've had in a long, long time, knock on wood. Mm-hmm. But I think Patrick Queen is that every down guy that through all their experiments, whether it's been the going back to the Mark Barons and drafting Devin Bush and all the other failures, the John Bostic, the 1 year guys who came in, tried to fit in, and then they shipped them out. Not this guy. This is the guy who can be the stabilizer and a very, if not dominant player, certainly a very productive, disruptive player in the middle of the field, and that's why they went out and signed him.
Joey Porter Jr. had a productive rookie season. Is he better this year, Gerry?
Yeah, he is, Steve. And they're, when I say they're using him different, they're not always having him shadow the other guy.
Yeah.
But they are flip-flopping him and using him in different defensive formations. But, and you can tell, like, when I say his tackling ability, it's the fact he's making more plays around the line of scrimmage. And there's no question he's been even better. Numbers-wise, I'm not sure that it's any different, or it's certainly nothing that's sitting there, leading the league. Mm-hmm. But they're completely thrilled with the guy, and they have complete confidence in him. And, yeah, he is definitely even better than he was toward the second half of last year.
I'll flip it back to offense for just a moment, because I thought in the offseason, to me, a good pickup was a guy like Van Jefferson. I think not awesome and incredible, but I thought a good pickup. How well's he played?
Well, certainly he's looked better with Russell Wilson, as you can imagine. And I don't mean that as a knock necessarily against Justin Fields. It's just that's what happens when you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson. If Van Jefferson was viewed as like, okay, a third or fourth receiver, people would think he's, is a really good pickup. Right. But I don't think any expectation of bringing him in and being like a number 2 guy, I think that was just a bit unrealistic. But you can see with Russell Wilson what they were hoping to see in Van Jefferson. And we've seen that the past couple of games. And you could say the same thing for Calvin Austin. They've been more active and more involved in the offense with Russell Wilson. So now you bring in Mike Williams, and if he can, we'll see what happens with him. But now you're looking at a receiving core, that you have 4 guys that you can rotate in there. I don't think Roman Wilson is going to fit in at all this year, the rookie from Michigan. Right. Injuries have just held him back. But I think that in part was one of the reasons why they signed Mike Williams. And I will tell you, they were close to bringing in Christian Kirk last week or 2 weeks ago until he suffered that season-ending injury, and there went that deal. But they thought they were going to get him, and so short of that, then it's why they went out and got Mike Williams.
Well, Washington ends up with the second overall pick in the draft, and they get Jalen Daniels. They're 7-2. So what will this tell us about the Steelers this weekend as they hit that game 9 and go past the halfway mark?
Well, that's a good question, because I think this game is going to tell us a little bit more about the Steelers. Look, one game isn't going to change who and what they are, but I think the one game can tell you who and what they are, because now you're going on the road against an upstart team where there's a lot of excitement about. They're unbeaten at home. They've been able to score a lot of points. You see the Hail Mary, that's a pass 2 weeks ago. That's just another sign of kind of like the magic that is happening with the Commanders. And teams could ride that just the way the Houston Texans did last year with C.J. Stroud. But I think going on the road, and facing a team that is surging and facing a player who was probably hands down the Rookie of the Year, I think it's going to tell you, I don't want to say a lot about this football team, but it's going to tell you a little bit more about this football team. And I think it can be a significant game from that standpoint in terms of kind of deciding, okay, what are the Steelers? Are they a legitimate contender, and can this continue? Or are they going to be a team that's going to fight to be 10-7?
Always enjoyable to sit down and have great conversation with friends that know so much. Thank you so much for your time, Gerry, as always. Talk soon.
Well, you got it, Stephen. I always look forward to chatting with you, my friend.
Thank you. The great Gerry Dulac. Always great to talk with him. This half hour being brought to you by Purdy Insurance. Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Auto, home, life, business, boat, motorcycle, RV. Multitude of insurance needs. We all have them. They will do everything to make sure you're fully insured, but also do everything they can to save you money. Customer service so important to everybody at Purdy Insurance. Market Street in Sunbury, go to purdyinsurance.com, and let's bring in Scott Lauber now from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Scott, how you been?
I'm doing well. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing fine. I think the last thing Philly fans expected in April, May, and into June was that at this particular week there'd be a post-mortem being written about their team. The finish was, for everybody at Fowler's team, so unsatisfying. In the end, what did you see that kept them from advancing?
Well, I mean, if we're talking specifically about the 4 games against the Mets, it boils down to 2 things. They didn't score, and they didn't get the kind of bullpen performance that they were expecting or that they'd gotten all year long. So those are really the 2 things. They, but for 4 innings of Game 2, they didn't hit against the Mets. It was sort of a different way of quieting them. We were used to seeing when the Phillies went cold during the season, it was because teams would attack them with breaking stuff, often out of the zone. The Mets attacked them with fastballs, and the Phillies didn't hit them, which was a little bit of a head-scratcher. And then, they scored, I think, 1 run in the series before the 5th inning, and that was the Schwarber leadoff homer in Game 1. And then they didn't hold leads late, or they didn't hold the lead in the case of Game 1 late, but they also the Mets were able to pull away late in those games against guys like Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm, who had been so good for the Phillies all year. So that's really what I think the 4 games boils down to. But what's so confounding about the season as a whole is that they were 40-20. Let me get this right. They were 45-20 when they came home from London in early June, and they basically were a 500 team from there on out. So it's one of those things where you can look at the 4 games against the Mets and you could say, boy, what went wrong, and how do you fix it, and do you really want to overreact to 4 games? Or you could look at the final 3 months and say, why were they so average over the final 3 months, and should there have been warning signs that there would be an early postseason exit ahead?
All right, so let's play devil's advocate for a moment, Scott, if that's okay with you. We just had the passing at the age of 83 of Louis Tiant. Game 4, 1975 World Series, obviously a bygone era. I will concede. Game 4, he threw 163 pitches and threw a complete game, and the Red Sox needed every ounce out of them they could get. They won the game 5-4, tied the series up at 2 games apiece. Zach Wheeler threw 111 pitches and had given up 1 hit through 7 innings. In your mind, in modern era baseball, so let's go from a bygone era to the modern era, was there much of a decision to be made there by Rob Thompson?
I don't think so, because, as you said, modern baseball, right? It's a lot different from the baseball that you and I grew up with. I just turned 48. I remember. I don't remember that World Series because I wasn't born yet. It was a year before I was born, but I do remember baseball in the 80s very, very well. And I mean, look, I remember the Jack Morris game in '87. I remember the Oral Hershiser postseason in '88. I mean, I remember when starting pitching was king, and you would ride your horse for as long as that guy could go. And very often they were trained to go well into games, well past 100 pitches, and then some. So that was a different time, a different era. I think Wheeler was fantastic in Game 1. He threw, remind me again what the pitch count was?
111, I think.
111. I mean, you know, that's about as far nowadays as a starting pitcher usually goes. I think his high for the season was right around that number. So if you ask him to go back out there, I'm not going to tell you that he wasn't going to throw another scoreless inning up there, but it would have been a departure from the way you managed him and your bullpen all year long. There was no reason why, even with a 1-0 lead, you don't trust Hoffman in the 8th and Estevez in the 9th. It's what they had done all year. I think you could make the argument, right, if he was at 90 pitches, could he have given you another inning? But at 111, no, I think that was probably as much as he was going to, you know, as much as you could ask, given the way you've managed him and the way he's been managed his whole career. He is an ace, and I'm not sure that there's a guy that I would rather have on the mound in a game I had to win than Zach Wheeler right now in 2024. Mm-hmm. But, you know, 111 pitches is probably close to his limit.
Fair. I mean, and that's why. See, that's why subjects. I always get bothered a bit when subjects get upset with a question like that. I don't mean you in this case, because it just gives you a chance to answer it. It's okay, right? I mean, it's a question. You're allowed to ask a question because I think what I asked you was an open-ended question. You gave an answer. I think that's why I always get when people get like, "What are you asking that for?" I don't know, because it's a question. I'm not questioning you.
Look, I remember.
Yeah, I'm not questioning you.
Well, a game in 2009. I'm going to take you back now, and this is relatively recent history, and yet it's 15 years ago. There was a Sunday night game at Citizens Bank Park where Charlie Manuel left Pedro Martinez in for like 125 pitches or something like that, and we were sitting there going, "Is he crazy? Yeah. He's going to break this guy." I mean. This is unusual, and that was 15 years ago. You know, I think that if Zach Wheeler pitched 30 years ago, is he staying in that game? Of course he is, because he's probably been trained his whole career to go 8 or 9 innings in 130 pitches and then some. But that's not the case these days. And when you've got a bullpen that's built for, you know, normally you're going, you know, in the playoffs. Normally you're going to your bullpen in the 5th inning when your starters at
that's right
70 pitches. Right. So I think that was a decision too, that to leave Wheeler in as long as he did. It was Zach Wheeler, and he was pitching great. And so Rob Thompson rode him for about as long as he could, and then, did what he would normally do, which was go to the bullpen.
See, and that's something like, and Scott, you and I are, we've been in this profession a long time. There's a major difference between asking questions and questioning somebody. Right? And that's all it is you're just asking the question. Right? And then it's up to you, whatever answer you get. It's not a debate. It's like, I'd like to just know what the thought process was. Right?
Sure.
There's a big difference between
Sure.
What did you do that for? Now that's questioning somebody.
Sure. And look, when I cover a game, when people, when colleagues of mine, when we cover games, those are the sort of questions we're asking post game, and it's not like a gotcha question or like we're asking to second guess the manager. We're asking to kind of get his thought process. Take me through why you did what you did, and not like, in fairness, we ask those questions whether they work or not some of the time. I mean, sometimes I'm as curious to know why he made a move that worked as I am about why he made a move that didn't. And I think, obviously, like you said, some people handle that better than others. I think Rob Thompson usually handles it pretty well. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the nature of the business.
Step number one, by the way, speaking of Rob Thompson in the offseason, was to extend him. What was your thought on that?
Not surprised. I've covered Dave Dombrowski a long time, going back to his time with the Red Sox, and observed him longer than that. And he doesn't often fire managers. He really doesn't.
That's right.
The last time he fired a manager, he fired Joe Girardi in the middle of the season in 2022. But going back, I mean, the Red Sox lost in the first round 2 years in a row, 16 and 17, after winning the division. And he fired John Farrell and went to Alex Cora, who, of course, managed them to a World Series in 2018. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had that maybe in the back of my mind. They go from winning the World Series or losing in the World Series in 2022 to losing one round earlier last year and then one round earlier this year. So it does go through your head like, boy, you think he might do that. But honestly, what I took out of 45 minutes of hearing him talk yesterday was, they like their roster. They think that they have a roster that's capable of winning the World Series. They might be right. But, while I think there will be changes to some of that personnel this offseason, it's going to be pretty much the same group coming back, and the onus is on the players, I think. And I think they feel like they've got a manager who players respond to, who has been very successful since he took over in June of 2022. And I don't think Dombrowski felt like what happened in October was the fault of Rob Thompson. So he opted for continuity there. Maybe I was a little bit more surprised that the coaching staff will return in full, although I'm not sure what change I would have made there either. But they're bringing back the manager, they're bringing back the coaching staff, and it's on those guys to then, try to affect some change from the players that they have, and the players to buy into the changes that they're trying to get them to make, which is, from an offensive standpoint, they want them to use the whole field more. They want certain players to make certain changes specific to them. I think, there's going to be a lot of sort of figuring out of like, how can Trey Turner be a better player? How can Nick Castellanos be a better player? Bryson Stott, and so on and so forth. So, they opted for some continuity in the coaching staff and the manager's office, and they're going to hope that pays off with getting, percentage points better from each player as the season, as they enter next season.
As you go through 162 games, guys are going to land on the IL. Turner was on there for a period of time. Bohm was on there. Everybody seems to take a turn on there, which then brings up the depth of the farm system. In your opinion, what is the depth of the Phillies farm system where they can maybe fill a gap for 2 weeks?
Well, it's a good question because, you look at the guys that they called on to fill in. When Turner was out, it was Edmundo Sosa. He's a major league player, a major league bench player. When When JT Realmuto went down, it was Garrett Stubbs, and they called up Rafael Marchand, who played very well. They don't have a lot of, I guess there were times where they called on Cody Clemens, they called on Weston Wilson. Those guys came up from AAA. They have a lot of, veteran AAA players. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about prospects, if we're talking about difference makers, potential difference makers who could come in and be regulars, they don't have a ton of guys who are there, who are on the cusp. Yesterday at the news conference, Dave Dombrowski mentioned Justin Crawford being close or closer. Probably not ready at the start of next season, but he could come quickly next year at some point. They are counting on Andrew Painter at some point next year. Again, probably not right at the beginning of the year, but at some point in the year, they expect he'll be in their rotation. That's really it in terms of difference makers who are on the cusp or getting close. Aiden Miller is a guy they liked very, very much. Didn't want to trade him at the deadline. Very good-looking infielder, but not there yet. He's still he barely scratched the surface in AA this year. Yeah. I think that's where he'll begin next year. So, they have a lot of veteran minor league guys who can come in and fill in for a short period of time, but they're still kind of waiting on some of their top prospects to really be there and be guys who they can count on as regulars, so to speak.
Reading between the lines, maybe, of what Dave Dombrowski said, it's not going to be all 26 guys coming back. So where are the areas that he is targeting beyond individual improvement where maybe he needs a physical, in other words, a different person filling a role? Yeah. Where's he looking?
So, he talked a lot yesterday about the status quo, Some of that, I think, sort of set up an off-season in which he knows it's going to be difficult to really change the roster in a meaningful way because, they have $220 million tied up in 11 players coming back. That's before they tackle their 9 arbitration-eligible players. Their payroll for the luxury tax came in at about $260 million this year. That was over the second threshold. They're going to be back in that same area next year, if not a little bit higher. So it's not really like a roster that's all that flexible. So he talked a lot about the status quo, but he also pointed out the fact that the outfield is a lot less settled than the infield. We all know that. Right. Left field and center field were areas where they platooned a lot this year or, didn't have a high-priced player, chewing up a lot of the at-bats. Those, I think, are the two easiest areas for them to change the personnel a little bit. He said something that stuck out to me, which was sometimes you trade good players for good players. Yeah. And, I think the way I interpret that is if you could take a Brandon Marsh, let's say, who they like for different reasons. They like because he brings some energy. They like what he can do against right-handed pitching. He is a perfectly okay platoon left fielder right now who they think could, they still think maybe at some point he'll hit lefties, but he hasn't hit lefties yet. Right. You take a player like that who's a good player and you trade him for maybe a player with a little bit of a different skill set, maybe somebody who makes more contact, doesn't strike out as much. That's sort of, I think, maybe the kind of a move I could see them making in a spot on the field like left field. Maybe they look to upgrade in center field a little bit. Yohan Rojas is going to spend the off season in Florida, in Clearwater. He's going to work on a lot of different things in terms of his offense. But he's still very much a work in progress offensive player who maybe never hits. Who knows? So I do think left field and center field would be the two easiest places to change if they could find the right player, the right match. But, I think they'll be open to a lot of things. He also used the word open-minded yesterday 4 or 5 times in 45 minutes. So, I think that they're going to be looking around to see where could they get better. But, again, there are not a lot of areas on the field where they're going to have a player who's easy to move out in order to get another player in.
How about the ability? What's the opinion of the 4th and 5th starter for them, which is usually in a starting rotation the most flexible parts?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, they like their top four very much.
Yeah.
Wheeler, Nola.
Yep.
Christopher Sanchez took a big step forward this year.
No doubt.
And, Ranger Suarez had a great first half, struggled in the second half, pitched well, I thought, in Game 4 against the Mets, well enough. I mean, kept them in the game. Did not pitch great, but kept them in the game.
Right.
I think that they're comfortable with those four. Now, they know that they're going to have to do some things with the number 5 spot, which is a little tricky because, you've got Taijuan Walker, who they now are going to have back in spring training to try to win back the 5th starter job. They're not giving it to him by any means because he had just an awful year.
Right.
But there's a lot of money there. I think what they'll try to do, honestly, is they'll try to find a couple of Spencer Turnbull types like they found last year with Turnbull to kind of bring in maybe multiples. Like last year it was difficult. They had a hard time finding starting pitching depth. Maybe they work a little harder on that, bring in a couple of guys like that to compete with Walker, and eventually Andrew Painter, they're hoping, steps into the rotation and takes that spot. So it's kind of a fluid situation. I don't expect them to be hot and heavy in the starter market the way a lot of other teams will be. I think that their concern is more how do they round out this offense and how do they fix or how do they reset the bullpen with Estevez and Hoffman both as free agents.
I love talking baseball with you. So I know I eat up a lot of your time, but I appreciate it really a lot. Scott, thanks so much. Thanks for the time as always.
You bet. Anytime, Steve.
Scott Lauber, he's terrific. He's just terrific. Love talking baseball with him. Half hour brought to you by our good friends at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com as we continue on News Radio 1070 WKOK.